All right, buckle up because today we're diving into some of the most mind-bogglingly stupid steering mechanisms ever designed. Engineers who thought they were revolutionizing how we control vehicles, but instead created nightmares on wheels. Before we get into this disaster parade, smash that subscribe button because you won't believe the catastrophic failures coming your way. Trust me, you'll want to be here for more of this insanity. Let's kick things off with the Koenigsegg Jesko Absolute's tiny steering wheel. Now, I love Koenigsegg, don't get me wrong, but someone thought making a steering wheel the size of a dinner plate was genius. This thing is so small that when you need to make quick corrections at high speed, good luck gripping anything substantial. Drivers reported their hands slipping off during spirited driving because there's literally nothing to hold on to. The wheel looks cool in photos, sure, but when you're trying to control a hypercar with over 1,500 horsepower, you want something you can actually grab. Multiple test drivers complained about the lack of leverage, making parking maneuvers feel like arm wrestling a gorilla. The whole point of a steering wheel is having surface area to manipulate, and Koenigsegg said, nah, let's make it adorable instead. Next up is the BMW iDrive controller from the early 2000s. BMW decided that steering wheels were too mainstream and added a rotary knob to control everything. Sounds convenient until you realize you have to navigate through 17 menus while driving just to change the radio station. Want to adjust the temperature? Better hope you memorize the menu tree because you're taking your eyes off the road for a solid 10 seconds. The system was so counterintuitive that dealerships had to offer special training sessions. Imagine buying a luxury car and needing a tutorial on how to turn on the heated seats. Drivers were getting into accidents because they were staring at a screen instead of watching traffic. The controller would sometimes register inputs wrong, cranking the volume to maximum when you wanted to lower it. BMW eventually improved it, but that first generation was a legitimate hazard that made simple tasks feel like defusing a bomb. Then we have the Knight Rider-style yoke steering in the Tesla Model S Plaid. Elon Musk watched a 1980s TV show and thought, that's the future. The yoke looks futuristic, until you need to make a U-turn and realize your hands are doing acrobatics trying to spin this thing around. Traditional steering wheels let you shuffle or hand over hand, but with a yoke, you're constantly repositioning awkwardly. Parking becomes a workout session because you can't just palm the wheel and spin it. Tesla owners were posting videos of themselves struggling in parking lots looking absolutely ridiculous trying to maneuver. The kicker? No physical turn signal stalks either, so you're tapping the yoke while trying to turn, which sometimes cancels your signal mid-intersection. Multiple owners reported hitting the horn accidentally during turns because the button placement is terrible. Tesla eventually made it optional, which tells you everything about how well this brilliant idea went over with actual drivers. Moving on to the Citroën DS hydraulic steering system. Citroën engineering is legendary for being weird, and the DS took it to another level. The steering was powered entirely by hydraulic fluid, which sounds fancy until the system develops a leak. And oh boy, did it leak. Owners would wake up to find their cars sitting lopsided in the driveway with green fluid everywhere like a crime scene. When the hydraulic system failed while driving, the steering would suddenly become impossibly heavy, turning your luxury car into an uncontrollable 2-ton paperweight. Imagine cruising down the highway when suddenly you need the strength of an Olympic weightlifter to make a lane change. And the system required constant maintenance and specialized mechanics who charged a fortune because nobody else wanted to deal with the complexity. Parts were expensive and the whole setup was so over-engineered that simple repairs took hours. Beautiful car, absolutely idiotic steering mechanism that turned ownership into a mechanical nightmare. Let's talk about the Chrysler Corporation's swivel seats with rotating steering wheel from the 1950s. Someone at Chrysler thought people needed easier entry and exit, so they made the front seats swivel outward. Cool concept, except the steering wheel rotated with the seat, meaning if you didn't lock everything back perfectly, your steering wheel could be facing the wrong direction. Drivers would start their cars with the wheel at an angle and immediately swerve into traffic. The mechanical linkage was prone to failure, sometimes locking up mid-rotation and trapping people halfway in and halfway out of the car. The system added weight and complexity for a feature that saved maybe 3 seconds getting in. Dealerships reported constant complaints about the mechanism breaking, and aftermarket shops did brisk business, removing the whole system and installing conventional seats. It was a solution desperately searching for a problem that didn't exist. The Saab Turbo, with its ignition between the seats, seemed quirky until you pair it with their column-mounted shifter and realize the whole cockpit is chaos. The steering column had so much stuff attached that it became a crowded mess of levers and stalks. Drivers constantly hit the wrong control, activating wipers when they wanted the turn signals. And the column shifter would sometimes pop out of gear during spirited driving because the linkage couldn't handle the vibrations from the turbocharged engine. Saab owners loved their cars despite the quirks, but even die-hard fans admitted the steering column setup was fundamentally flawed. Mechanics hated working on them because accessing anything required removing 17 other components. The whole design philosophy seemed to prioritize being different over being functional, and the steering controls paid the price. Now we get to the Edsel with its push-button transmission in the steering wheel center. Ford thought putting transmission controls in the hub of the steering wheel was innovation. The buttons were tiny, easy to hit accidentally, and the mechanism was unreliable. Drivers would accidentally shift into neutral at stoplights by brushing the buttons while turning. The electrical contacts corroded quickly, leaving people stranded when the transmission wouldn't respond to inputs. Cold weather made the buttons stick, and hot weather caused false activations. The placement meant you couldn't rest your hand naturally on the wheel without risking an accidental gear change. Combined with the Edsel's already legendary status as a marketing disaster, the stupid steering wheel controls became a symbol of everything wrong with the car. Owners retrofitted conventional shifters as fast as they could, and the push-button steering wheel became a punchline in automotive history. The Lexus lane keeping assist that fights you for control deserves special mention. Lexus thought helping drivers stay in lanes was smart, except they calibrated it to be insanely aggressive. The system doesn't gently suggest, it actively wrestles the steering wheel like you're an incompetent child. Drivers reported the system jerking the wheel during legitimate lane changes, nearly causing accidents. On roads with poor line markings, it freaks out and ping-pongs you between lanes. You can't relax because the car might suddenly yank the wheel at any moment. The override requires significant force, meaning if you need to swerve for an obstacle, you're fighting your own car's steering. Multiple complaints cited near misses because the lane-keeping assist decided a construction zone merge wasn't valid and tried to steer into barriers. You can turn it off, but it resets every ignition cycle, forcing you to disable it every single drive. It's supposed to be a safety feature, but feels more like having a backseat driver physically grabbing the wheel. The Cadillac Escalade's Super Cruise with hands-free driving sounds amazing until the steering goes haywire. The system works great on perfect highways but becomes dangerously confused in construction zones. Drivers reported the steering suddenly veering toward concrete barriers when lane markings disappeared. The infrared camera, watching your face to ensure attention, sometimes misreads sunglasses or shadows, disengaging the system without warning and expecting you to grab the wheel instantly. Multiple owners described heart-stopping moments when Super Cruise steered them into adjacent lanes for no apparent reason. The system requires constant map updates or it refuses to activate, and dead zones exist even on major highways. But when it works, it's impressive, but when it fails spectacularly. The problem is drivers get complacent, trusting the system until it does something catastrophically stupid. Cadillac marketed it as revolutionary, but early adopters became beta testers for potentially deadly software bugs. The Alfa Romeo's quirky steering column-mounted shifter paddle placement defies logic. Instead of putting paddles behind the wheel where your fingers naturally rest, Alfa mounted them on the column so they don't rotate with the wheel. Sounds minor until you're mid-corner and reach for a downshift only to grab air because the paddle is now 90 degrees away from where your hand expects. Track drivers complained about missed shifts during spirited driving because muscle memory is useless when the controls move relative to your hands. But the placement was supposedly for aesthetics and Formula One authenticity, except Formula One wheels don't rotate multiple turns. Road cars do. The result is a system that looks sleek but functions terribly in real-world driving. Alfa Romeo fans defended it as part of the brand's character, but even loyalists admitted adapting required consciously thinking about every shift instead of it being instinctive. The Pontiac Aztek's entire dashboard and steering setup looks like a committee designed it drunk. The steering wheel itself was fine, but the surrounding controls were scattered illogically. Climate controls were nowhere near where you'd expect, forcing drivers to hunt while driving. The cruise control stalk was positioned where you'd naturally grab during turns, leading to accidental activation or deactivation. Visibility was terrible because the A-pillars were massive, creating huge blind spots during turns. The Aztek became famous for being ugly, but the interior ergonomics were equally disastrous. Simple tasks required contorting your arm at weird angles, and the placement of essential controls seemed almost random. Pontiac's attempt at revolutionary design resulted in a vehicle that fought you at every interaction. It's no wonder the Aztek became a punchline, and the steering wheel area encapsulated everything wrong with the design philosophy. The Honda Prelude's four-wheel steering seemed genius until the rear steering system broke. When functioning, it supposedly improved handling, but the complex mechanical linkage was fragile and expensive to maintain. Once the rear steering failed, the car handled unpredictably, with the back end feeling loose and uncertain during cornering. Many owners simply disconnected the system and lived with front-wheel steering only, making the whole feature pointless. The system added weight, complexity, and cost without delivering proportional benefits. Mechanics hated working on it because diagnosis required specialized equipment. Insurance companies sometimes charged more because repairs were expensive. The four-wheel steering became a liability rather than an asset, and Honda quietly dropped it. Prelude owners loved their cars despite the gimmick, not because of it. The General Motors variable ratio steering that changed sensitivity based on speed sounds smart until it malfunctions. The system made steering lighter at low speeds for parking and heavier at highway speeds for stability. Great in theory, but catastrophic when the sensors fail. Drivers reported the steering suddenly becoming ridiculously heavy at low speeds or terrifyingly light at high speeds. The transition between modes sometimes happened abruptly mid-corner, unsettling the car's balance. Repair costs were absurd because the system integrated into expensive electronic modules. Some owners experienced complete steering failures when the variable ratio system crashed, requiring hard resets on the side of the road. GM installed these systems across multiple models, creating a widespread reliability nightmare. What should have been a refinement became another reason to avoid certain model years entirely. The Nissan Infiniti Direct Adaptive Steering with no mechanical connection is terrifying. Infiniti eliminated the physical link between steering wheel and wheels by using only electronics. When it works fine, but the complete lack of mechanical feedback feels unnatural. Drivers can't sense road conditions through the wheel, making it feel like a video game. The real nightmare is knowing one electrical failure means zero steering control. Traditional systems have mechanical backup even if power assist fails. This system has nothing. You're trusting your life to sensors and software with no redundancy. Multiple automotive journalists criticized it as a solution to a non-existent problem. Infiniti marketed it as futuristic, but customers rejected it because humans instinctively distrust having no physical connection to something as critical as steering. It was discontinued quickly after poor reception, proving sometimes old-fashioned. Mechanical linkages exist for good reasons. The Smart Fortwo's twitchy steering makes city driving a nightmare. The car is tiny, so engineers made the steering absurdly sensitive. Every minor input sends you zigzagging like a pinball. On highways, the twitchiness becomes dangerous as crosswinds and road imperfections cause constant corrections. The short wheelbase amplifies the problem, making the car feel unstable at any speed above 40. Drivers described white-knuckling the wheel just to maintain a straight line. Parking should be easy in a tiny car, but the steering is so sensitive that you're constantly overcompensating. The Smart Fortwo's steering perfectly encapsulates the problem with over-engineering simple tasks. A small car needs precise but predictable steering, not a nervous system that reacts to every breath. Owners either adapted or sold the cars quickly because the steering behavior was fundamentally exhausting. The Audi A8 with active steering that moves the rear wheels slightly sounds premium until both systems disagree. The front wheels steer normally, while rear wheels make tiny adjustments for stability. When calibrated perfectly, it's imperceptible. When the system glitches, the car feels like the front and rear are fighting each other. Drivers reported strange handling characteristics that disappeared and reappeared randomly. Dealerships struggled to diagnose intermittent problems because the system involved dozens of sensors and modules. Repair bills easily exceeded thousands for what sometimes turned out to be software glitches. The active steering was supposed to justify the luxury price tag, but it became a reliability concern that hurt resale values. Audi forums filled with owners discussing how to disable the system entirely, which should tell you how well this premium feature performed in reality. The Mazda RX-8's steering wheel-mounted oil level gauge is brilliantly stupid. Rotary engines consume oil by design, so Mazda put the gauge in the steering wheel. Sounds convenient until you realize it's only visible when the wheel is centered. Turn the wheel during driving and the gauge rotates out of view. Drivers had to straighten the wheel to check oil level, taking attention off the road. The placement meant you couldn't easily check it while stationary with the wheels turned. It was a perfect example of design prioritizing form over function. Mazda could have placed it anywhere more sensible, but someone decided the steering wheel was ideal. RX-8 owners loved their rotary engines, but universally mocked the oil gauge placement as hilariously impractical. The Chevrolet Corvette C7's electronic steering feel lacks soul. Chevy went fully electric power steering and deleted the mechanical feedback that made earlier Corvettes engaging. The steering became numb, providing no information about road surface or tire grip. Track drivers complained about reduced confidence because they couldn't feel the limit approaching. The artificial weight felt generic rather than communicative. Enthusiasts mourned the loss of steering feel, considering it a fundamental part of the driving experience. Chevy tried to tune it better in later years, but electric steering inherently filters out the subtle feedback hydraulic systems provided. The C7 was fast and capable, but the steering made it feel less special than predecessors. Sometimes newer technology is technically better, but experientially worse. The Fiat 500 steering column that doesn't telescope properly is infuriating. The adjustment range is minimal, leaving tall drivers cramped and short drivers stretching. The wheel only moves slightly, forcing uncomfortable driving positions. Combined with a non-adjustable seat height in some trims, finding a comfortable position becomes impossible. Fiat apparently designed it for average Italian heights and forgot the rest of the world exists. Drivers reported back pain and shoulder strain from contorting to reach controls properly. The steering wheel itself was fine, but the inability to position it correctly ruined ergonomics. It's such a basic feature that getting it wrong seems almost intentional. The 500 had charm and style, but the steering adjustability, or lack thereof, made long drives miserable. The Subaru WRX's steering, that changes completely between model years, creates confusion. The 2015 redesign switched to electric steering that felt completely different from the hydraulic system. Longtime WRX owners hated the change, complaining about reduced feedback and engagement. The new system felt disconnected and vague compared to the direct hydraulic feel. Subaru claimed it was for efficiency and packaging, but enthusiasts saw it as losing the car's soul. Online forums exploded with debates about which generation had better steering. Some owners kept older models specifically because of the steering feel. The radical change alienated the core enthusiast base who valued the mechanical connection. Subaru eventually refined it, but the damage to the WRX's reputation among purists was done. The Range Rover's air suspension, combined with steering, creates a floating, disconnected feeling. The suspension is so soft that steering inputs feel delayed as the body rolls excessively. Cornering becomes an exercise in faith as you turn the wheel and wait for the vehicle to respond. The disconnect between input and action is disorienting, making spirited driving feel dangerous. On highways, the floaty feeling combines with light steering to create nervousness at speed. Range Rover buyers wanted luxury and off-road capability, but the steering calibration prioritized comfort over any sense of control. The air suspension compounded the issue by allowing excessive body motion. Driving a Range Rover on winding roads feels like piloting a boat rather than a vehicle. It's capable off-road, but the steering and suspension tuning make it feel clumsy everywhere else. The Volkswagen Beetle's steering column that obstructs the gauge cluster is baffling. Depending on your seating position, the steering wheel blocks the speedometer partially or completely. VW apparently never tested ergonomics with actual human proportions. Drivers had to choose between a comfortable steering position or being able to see their speed. The problem affected multiple generations, suggesting VW didn't consider it a priority. Online communities shared tricks for finding the least bad position, which shouldn't be necessary. The Beetle had personality and charm, but basic functionality, unlike seeing the gauges, should be non-negotiable. It's the kind of design flaw that makes you question what the engineers were thinking during development. The Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross's touchpad controller for infotainment while driving requires taking eyes off the road constantly. The system forces you to use a touchpad instead of physical controls, and it's positioned awkwardly. Adjusting anything requires hunting across menus with imprecise touchpad inputs. The steering wheel controls are limited, forcing reliance on the terrible touchpad. Mitsubishi prioritized minimalist aesthetics over usability, creating an interface that actively distracts drivers. Simple tasks like changing radio stations take multiple steps. The system lags occasionally, not registering inputs and requiring repeated attempts. Now, reviews universally criticize the control scheme as dangerous and frustrating. Mitsubishi eventually revised it after customer complaints, but early Eclipse Cross owners suffered through one of the worst infotainment implementations combined with inadequate steering wheel controls. The Tesla Autopilot phantom braking combined with hands-on steering creates panic. The system randomly slams the brakes for non-existent obstacles, and with your hands on the wheel, you feel the car fighting you. Overpasses, shadows, and signs trigger emergency braking on clear roads. The sudden deceleration startles drivers and endangers following traffic. Tesla forums document thousands of phantom braking incidents across all models. The system requires hands on the wheel for monitoring, but then ignores your inputs when it decides to brake. The contradiction creates confusion about who's actually controlling the vehicle. Tesla continuously updates software to fix it, but years later, phantom braking remains an issue. It's a steering and control disaster that undermines confidence in autonomous systems. Finally, the Yugo's entire steering system represents catastrophic cost-cutting. Every component was the cheapest possible, resulting in excessive play and vague response. The steering wheel had inches of dead zone before the wheels responded. Turning felt indirect and imprecise, like stirring pudding. The components wore out quickly, making the already terrible steering progressively worse. Mechanics found substandard materials throughout, explaining the rapid deterioration. Whilst the Yugo's steering encapsulated the philosophy of building the absolute cheapest car possible, regardless of quality. It became legendary for terrible engineering, and the steering was Exhibit A. Owners joked about the steering being a suggestion rather than a command. The Yugo proved that some ideas should never make it past the concept phase, and its steering was catastrophically idiotic from day one. There you have it. 25 steering mechanisms that prove engineers sometimes create solutions worse than the original problems. If you enjoyed this journey through automotive stupidity, hit that like button and subscribe for more mechanical nightmares. What steering disaster did I miss? Drop a comment below with your horror stories. Until next time, keep your hands on the wheel and hope it actually does what you want. Thanks for sticking with me through this absolute carnival of terrible steering design decisions. Honestly, looking at all these catastrophes makes you realize how many engineers got way too creative when they should have just stuck with what works. The pattern is pretty obvious when you think about it. Someone gets an idea, thinks it's revolutionary, skips the testing phase where actual humans would immediately point out the problems, and boom, you've got a steering nightmare on the road. It's wild how often the solution creates bigger problems than what it was supposedly fixing. The steering wheel is one of the most important interfaces between driver and machine, yet somehow these companies kept finding new ways to mess it up. From tiny dinner plate wheels to yokes that require acrobatics, from hydraulic systems that leak everywhere to touchpads that distract you from the road, the list goes on. What really gets me is that many of these manufacturers had the resources and expertise to get it right. They had engineers, test drivers, and focus groups. Yet they still launched these disasters. Sometimes I think the issue is groupthink in design meetings where nobody wants to be the person saying, the emperor has no clothes. So everyone nods along until millions of cars with terrible steering are already on the road. The good news is that modern engineering has gotten much better about catching these problems before production. Standardized testing, crash simulations, and ergonomic reviews help prevent the worst offenders. But every few years, and some company still thinks they've found a better way and introduces something equally questionable. So thanks again for letting me vent about automotive engineering failures. If you found this helpful or just enjoyed the chaos, please smash that subscribe button. I've got tons more content about design disasters, engineering failures, and mechanical nightmares coming your way. See you next time.